Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you're having an amazing day and thanks so much for joining me for another art video. In today's video, I'm going to be taking you through my entire process for sketching the inside of a room. This is a practice sketch that I created in my sketchbook, and it is an awesome way to practice your 3D form and perspective. For this one, I am using a reference photo as loose inspiration, which, by the way, I'm going to be leaving a link to this photo down below in the description box in case you'd like to download it yourself and practice with it. I do want to say though that the entire process, the steps that I'm going to be walking you through are exactly the same that I would use whenever I am actually sitting in a room and I am drawing what I have in front of me in real life. In other words, my steps, my process, it's the same whether I'm using a reference photo or whether I'm drawing or sketching from life, otherwise known as from direct observation. All right, you guys, let's go ahead and get started with our informal perspective practice. So I'm going to be using a 2B drawing pencil. Usually, if you've checked out any of my drawing tutorials, I like getting started with an HB when I'm creating my preliminary outline sketch, but I want to make sure that you can see what I am doing, so I went with a slightly softer pencil grade for this. 2B drawing pencil, and later on, once I am done with my graphite drawing, I'm going to be using a pigment liner from Staedtler in 0.1 tip size to define things a little bit more, add a little bit more contrast and detail, and maybe even some texture. I also have a couple of erasers on hand. I have my soft graphite eraser, very basic eraser here, and I also have a kneaded eraser. I also have a simple metallic sharpener so that I can sharpen my pencil if I need to along the way. So those are the basic drawing supplies that I'm going to be using to create this study. You might also find it helpful to bring in a ruler for this practice because we're going to be creating lots of straight lines, and straight lines can be challenging, especially if they're longer lines. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So the very first thing that I am doing is I am noticing the straight lines present in the photo. I am noticing the straight vertical created by that corner of that room where the walls meet. I am also noticing the straight lines created by the corners where the ceiling meets the walls and where the floor meets the walls. Of course, those are slanted lines, and we need to do our best to replicate those angles to the best of our abilities without having a grid drawn in. I'm going to start with what's easiest, which is the straight vertical line in the corner of the room. So what I'm doing here is I'm placing my ruler as straight as possible. My ruler, as you can see, is a little bit more to the right than to the left of my drawing area because in that photo, the corner of the room is way closer to the right edge of the photo than to the left edge of the photo. So that's why I'm placing it right here. I'm just using the edge of my paper here and trying to create a vertical parallel line that matches this line right here with my ruler, just as best as I can. I'm gonna draw a vertical line right here, and that's gonna be the corner of my room. Remember, it's all about starting with largest shapes, okay, largest forms. I am tuning out everything, the window, the table, the bench, the lamp, all of that I am tuning out. That does not matter right now. All right, so once I'm done with this vertical, what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna do my best to replicate the corners of the room. So using your ruler, or if you want to do this completely freehand, that's also a great option if you're already at that point. Place your ruler more or less slanted, comparing the angle of your ruler to what you see in your photo. So I think it's somewhere around here. And I'm trying to draw pretty lightly because drawing, as I always say, it's a refinement process. And as you start adding in more things, you're gonna have more points of comparison. And I'm probably gonna have to modify some things, change some things as I go. That's okay and to be expected. All right, so that's more or less what I see for that top angle. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and add in the angle over here for this wall on the right. Keep drawing lightly so that you can erase mistakes later. Now I'm gonna go down and I'm gonna create the bottom corners of the room. So I wanna make sure that I leave a good height for my room. I don't want to make this too short or way too long that my drawing and everything that I want to add in here, the furniture and whatnot, would not fit into my drawing. Just intuitively, I am going to use my hand as a measuring tool here to visualize things. I think around here would be a good point, a good height for that corner. I'm gonna start my slanted lines in that point right there, the slanted lines at the bottom. So again, I'm placing my ruler down here, modifying that, that slant until it's relatively close to what I am seeing in that photo. I need my other corner over here. You can see how I'm helping myself with little tick marks, and I'm gonna be helping myself with lots of lines along the way. There are my 4 corners of the room. Can erase the little tick marks, sections of lines that I don't need, etc. So there you have it. There are my largest shapes. I have tuned out everything in front of these walls, on the floor, etc., just so that I can add in those walls. Ceiling, left wall, right wall, corner of the room, and floor. Now, the next thing that I would ask myself is, what are the next largest structures here, right, that I need to add in? So in this case, it would probably be the table and the bench. So I'm gonna make sure to get those in, and I'm gonna tune out the chairs, the plants, the lamp at the top. Everything else I'm still tuning out because those are smaller forms, smaller structures, smaller details. So do your best to visually, just in your head, remove them from the picture and focus on the straight lines for those largest forms and structures that you are able to see, and do your best to, for example, for the table, well, those little things that are on the table are covering up, also the chairs are covering up part of those lines. So I need to make up for the information that I'm visually lacking because those things are covering up sections of those structures. But if you have practiced drawing rectangular prisms in the 1 and the 2 point perspective grids, and also with other informal single object studies, then it shouldn't be that difficult to complete those lines. All right, so we know that these lines would eventually meet at some sort of vanishing point going off towards the right, outside, way off my page here. All right, so let's add in that table. So I'm trying to notice the slant of this table, and I have to make sure when I am adding in this line that the height of the table makes sense. If I add in this line way too high up in the wall, it's gonna look like the table might be floating or is just unbelievably tall. And if I make it way too small, that is also not gonna look like a table that is made for humans to sit on. So you have to bring in your knowledge of actual believable table heights. You can use your fingers or your hand to kind of visualize the height that would make sense. And then you can start drawing your line. Okay, so there's that back edge of the table. And now I'm going to complete this 3D form. You need to help yourself with the lines that you've already laid down. So how did I know what angle to place this? Well, I helped myself with this angle over here. And sometimes the lines that you create are not gonna be parallel, but that is gonna give you a great place to start. You can place that ruler at that same angle and then observe that reference photo and shift it either up or down, modify that slant according to what you're seeing in that photo. I am noticing the width over here for the back of the table, and also I'm using this line down here as I am intuitively shifting the angle of my ruler and visualizing where the table would end. I'm gonna use this line over here to end my table. I'm trying to notice how close this edge of the table is to this wall over here and making sure that there's enough space right here because I'm gonna be adding in a chair later. Okay, so I'm gonna complete this rectangular prism down here, and I know that the design of the table is not this blocky. There's actually a little section, wooden section coming out slightly, and then there's the base. However, it's important to simplify everything for yourself as much as possible in the beginning. And I'm just visualizing the entire thing as just being one single block. This is way too slanted and there's somewhat of a distortion created by the camera lens. So I'm not gonna make it as pronounced there. Okay, so as you can see, this is just a plain old rectangular prism. I'm gonna start adding in the legs of the table, which I'm gonna simplify as well as plain rectangular prisms. I'm gonna bring down this corner of the room just a little bit because I noticed there is more space in that photo between this edge and the edge of the room down here. So I'm just gonna bring it down. So as I said, the more elements you start adding into your drawing, the more points of comparison you're going to have. So this is why you need to keep your drawing light so that you can erase mistakes and refine as you go. I'm gonna try to replicate that same angle that I had before. Something that's important to know is that cameras certainly distort things. They can make the foreshortening present in photos even more intense because of that camera lens. So there's some of that happening here. So now I'm gonna go ahead and start adding in the legs for the table, which I'm also visualizing as simple rectangular prisms, even though I can tell that the legs are slightly tapered as they make their way down closer to the floor. I'm still gonna visualize them as simple rectangular prisms. I can then modify their design once I know that the form and the perspective looks good. So here, for example, I'm not able to tell in the photo where this would end. I'm just gonna use my intuition about how tables work in real life to kind of end it where I feel it would be believable. So this is another rectangular prism down here. We know we have a slant. We should have a slant down here. Because this would be closer to 2-point perspective, we know that there's another angle going over here. Okay, so there's one leg. I'm gonna add in another leg over here. Help yourself with a ruler if you need to. I think I need to bring this down a little bit lower because this line here should be aligned with the leg at the back, right? I need to bring down this leg because we know that the legs are aligned. They end exactly at the floor. They have the same height. And if I draw a line like this to help me with alignments for my legs and heights so that they can be the same, well, this wouldn't make sense because this leg would be floating in the air. So this tells me that I need to bring this leg down. Let's see if it works now. Almost. Gonna draw a line. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring this to end at this line right here. Okay, so now I know that this leg at the back is actually gonna be on the floor. It's not gonna look like it's floating. It's below this line, which means that it's on the floor, not floating in the air. So that makes way more sense. I'm gonna add this plane for this rectangular prism. So remember, use the lines that you've already laid down to help inform the other slanted lines that you're placing. Remember that the perspective has to be consistent in your piece, and so you have to pay attention to the angles that you've already created. Okay, so they're not perfect, but I have at least the legs laid down there. I can fix them later if I need to. So how about this leg over here? I'm gonna bring it down, and we know that plenty of this leg is covered by the bench. Once again, we know that these legs have to be exactly the same height. I am going to help myself with a line that I am drawing from this bottom of this leg over here. Bring it, pull it towards the right, and I know that this leg has to end here. Otherwise, they're not gonna look like they're the same height. They're the same size, and it's not gonna make sense. So there we go. There's the front kind of plane of this rectangular prism. And I need to add in the inner plane. So there's that leg, missing one more leg. So I can barely see that one at the corner there. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use this corner that I'm able to see of this top rectangular prism, and I'm just gonna use that as guidance. I know that these two should be aligned, right? They should have the same height. So help yourself with what you've already placed on paper. It has to end there so that it's in correct alignment and has the same height as this one over here. So once I have this, it's just a matter of drawing out the two planes. To get the sizes, to get the alignments right and all that. Okay, so it's now time to start sketching in the bench. So the bench I'm going to visualize as a simple rectangular prism as well. And what I'm noticing first is the distance between the top edge of the table and the top edge of the bench. So we know that this is more of a 2-point perspective than a 1-point perspective, and we would have two vanishing points going off way off towards either side. And so this tells me, because we're doing 2-point perspective, that I am going to open up this angle a little bit more for the bench. It's not the same as this. It's a little bit more open, but I don't want to get it too far off. I don't want to get it like this, and I don't want to get it like this. So I am using these lines that I've already laid down for myself, these angles, and I'm just bringing it down slightly because I know that this is more of a 2-point perspective. Just notice those lines and those angles present in the photo and those distances between the different elements. Okay, there we go. So there's the edge of the bench. Now I'm gonna do the corner of the bench down here. So I am, again, using this angle that I've created for the table, and I'm just bringing it down slightly. This is super long, but that's okay. I'll make it shorter in a bit. And then comparing this width to this width over here. Where does it end back here? All right, so there's that top plane for the bench. So now I can actually turn that flat shape into a 3D form, which in this case would be another rectangular prism. Now I know that it has a little bit of a step in that wood design for the bench, but I'm not gonna worry about that right now. I'm just gonna make it a simple rectangular prism. Okay, so I finished up with that rectangular prism, the main one for the bench. I'm now gonna be adding in the legs of the bench. So I'm gonna do the exact same thing that I did for the legs in the table, helping myself with straight lines along the bottom so that I can make sure that the legs have the same height and have that alignment that I need. Make sure that these come down to as low as you need them to be so that it looks like it's on the ground and not floating in the air. So I'm gonna erase this section of the leg from the table because it's kind of getting in the way right now. So that's the only little peeping section visible for that little leg that would be back here. Let's get these guys in the front. So if I were to draw a line, for example, because I need this leg to be the same height as this leg, right? So if I were to draw a line to help me, it would probably be off the page. Just gonna sketch in what I'm able to sketch in for this leg here. This is the front plane of the leg, and then you have the side plane. And then the leg over here, we need to be aligned with this one. Let me erase a section of this leg here so you can see what I'm doing. There's my table and the bench. Gonna do a little bit of erasing and refining, erasing parts of shapes and lines that would actually be covered up, and maybe doing a little bit of erasing out very dark feathery lines. Do a little bit of cleanup before moving on to the next part of this process. Okay, so now that I've added in the table, you can see how this seems a little bit too short to me. I'm gonna bring up the corner of the room here just a bit, maybe an inch or so that I can have a little bit more space, make that room a little bit taller. Just gonna bring this up about an inch and replicate these same angles that I had already created. Erase out these last ones. Now there's a lot more height to that room. Looks a lot better now. Okay, so now that I have the main rectangular prism structures for these two, now I can think of dividing these rectangular prisms into two rectangular prisms to create more of the design of that table in the photo. Now we're not going for direct replica of the photo here. We're mainly using the photo as loose inspiration. So your design doesn't have to be exactly the same. You can feel free to change things up. The objective of this exercise is really to arrive at something that looks believable when it comes to perspective and 3D form. But everything else, once you have that perspective and 3D form looking right, you can feel free to change up. So all I did here was I divided this rectangular prism into two. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring this in so it's a little bit more similar to what I'm seeing in the photo there. All right, I'm gonna do the design for the bench now. So now that I have the main rectangular prisms for this compound structure here, I can go ahead and refine details, add minor parts of the structure. So for the bench, we have this section here. So when I'm adding in this line, I'm looking at this one, modifying it slightly based on what I know about 2-point perspective. Keep on noticing the angles you've already placed. So these have to make sense with these. As you're doing all this, also bring in what we know about perspective in terms of things get smaller as they're receding away from us. So if you want to make, for example, the back legs a little bit more narrow and the front legs a tiny bit wider, then that would also help enhance that perspective. All right, so I'm pretty happy with the table and the bench, and it is time to move on to the medium-sized shapes. So for this one, I think I'm going to be adding in the window right here before moving on to anything else. So notice the angles again. What's the angle for that bottom edge of the window? And how close is it to the top edge of the table? I think I made this a little bit too slanted. I'm gonna fix this. Place it a little bit higher up. And then for the window frame, I can just use those same lines that I've already sketched in with my ruler. There's a little kind of corner here that I think I'm not gonna be adding in. I don't think it's necessary. I'm gonna leave that out. All right, so it's time to move on to the chairs on opposite ends of the table. And the chairs, I would see more as a combination of cylinders, a short cylinder for the seat, even though I can tell they're not perfectly round, but it's the 3D form that I can more closely relate that structure to. And also throughout the design, it has a lot of curved cylinders. Some are definitely more curved than others, but I definitely wouldn't bring in rectangular prisms necessarily to visualize those chairs. All in all, those chairs I'm gonna be drawing in a lot more intuitively because these are more cylindrical, and also because honestly these are secondary structures here. So as long as I make it clear that this chair is farther away than this chair and I make it smaller, and also as long as I get the structure and the perspective right for the largest portions of those chairs, which would be honestly the seats and maybe the legs, making sure that they're touching the ground, I'll be fine. I'm gonna be approaching them a lot more intuitively because of all of the complexity present in that structure. What I'm gonna do right here is I'm gonna create that shape that I see for the chair. I'm noticing how far away the edge of that top of that back rest of the chair is from the edge of the table, kind of getting it close there, and then just gonna complete that shape there. And the seat is important to get right. It has thickness to it. And then this, actually I brought it out a little bit too much. I'm gonna connect this with a little cylinder. I think I opened this a little bit too much at the bottom. Erase this. And then I can tell from the chair that I'm able to see a little bit more of over here closest to us that this design is kind of like a cross, kind of like that. So inform yourself with what you are able to see, because we know that these chairs are the same, right? So if you're missing any information because the table is covering it up, well, what can you take from this chair that you are able to see more of? And then visualize what that design would look like in this perspective. I'm getting in the legs here. This leg of this chair is overlapping the leg of the table. The legs are not straight cylinders, they're kind of curving outwards a little bit. So maybe I decide not to add in that little back leg for the chair because in my drawing, this leg of the table is covering it up, and honestly, I don't think it would add or take away from this drawing if I don't add it in. So I'm gonna go ahead and add in this chair. So what am I able to see of this chair? Well, the first thing that I'm able to see is this curved cylindrical structure. That's actually one of the back legs of the chair. And then what else am I able to see? Okay, so I'm able to see that the other one would be around here. Again, very, very intuitive here. We know that these are the same height. So if you draw a line right here, they have to be aligned. I'm gonna pull this up. I'm gonna erase the sections of the table that this would be covering. Make this a little bit taller because again, these should be aligned. Now I'm gonna add in the seat. So where do I see that coming out? And what's that shape that I see there? It's kind of like that. And then it has a thickness to it, so I'm gonna make those side planes. And again, there's a difference between my drawing and the photo in terms of the distance left between the seat of the chair and the leg of the table. But again, just like with this one over here, I don't think that that is gonna take away from the drawing, and the main objective is there. I'm paying attention to what the main objective is. So slight differences like that are not gonna make or break my drawing. And it's important that as an artist, you also learn to discern between mistakes or imperfections that are worth fixing, going through the trouble of fixing, and which are fine to leave as is. especially when you're drawing freehand, things are not going to be perfect. Things are not going to be exactly the same as what you're seeing, and that's okay. So if those irregularities don't break the realism, it's fine, just leave them. Okay, so I'm going to bring in this other leg and the other leg. There'll be very little visible of the other leg. I'm going to add in the back. Then there's the cross, goes all the way down here. This section would actually be curving, so I'm gonna leave it like that. So all that's left is adding in the minor details at this point. The most difficult stuff is already done. Plant pots here would be cylinders, tapered cylinders. There's a larger one in the back, then a smaller one in the front. Then there's kind of a napkin holder to the left of them. And after I've added in the cylinders, I would think of adding in plants and flowers, which I'm gonna be adding in very loosely with my pen and ink. So I don't really have to worry that much about adding them in with pencil. But the smaller you get with your elements and details, the looser and more expressive you can be, the quicker you can add them in, because all of the main perspective and 3D form work is already in, it's already done. And add in the little detail on the wall. I'm gonna leave this thing out, the white thing here on the wall. I could decide to add in some trees right here outside the window. Just for a little more interest. Now, if you wanted to add in the light fixture, the little lamp, well, this would be more similar to a sphere, or at least a part of a sphere. I would just draw in the ellipse, kind of more or less how I see it. You can see distortion in that ellipse, a tilt, and that is created by the camera lens. It's important to know that photos are not actually how you see things in real life. There is always some distortion that takes place with that camera lens. Also some altering of color. Sometimes some amount of detail and shadows are left out. So this is also why it's so important to do some work from direct observation as well. Okay, so there's a little light fixture. And then finally, I'm gonna add in these nice little lights just because I really like how these lights look. Maybe I'm gonna make them come lower down. So here is my drawing. I'm gonna take just a second to use my kneaded eraser and tap over my pencil sketch, because what I'm gonna be doing next is I'm gonna be using my Staedtler pigment liner to do some quick pen and ink work in this piece, defining edges, creating a little bit more detail, maybe adding in certain textures even, whatever I feel like doing for this piece. But honestly, the objective for this study is done, it's complete, which was using informal perspective to communicate effective perspective in 3D form. So this is like a bonus part of the process, an extra step that I want to do to just keep on practicing my pen and ink work. You can decide to leave your sketch as is. I am just going to do this, and I have many tutorials on pen and ink and lots of tips for beginners on pen and ink, which I'm gonna make sure to link to down below in the text section of this post, because this is not going to be a step-by-step tutorial for using pen and ink. So I will be speeding up this part of this process, but I just wanted to share this with you because quite often I take my studies a step further if I want to do a two-in-one kind of study work, practice two things simultaneously, okay? So here we go. Learn to embrace the wobble if you're into pen and ink. Embrace those imperfections as part of the piece. Trying to skip over those sections of shapes and forms that I shouldn't be tracing over because they're actually covered up by another element, so it wouldn't make sense that they actually show or are visible. I think I'm gonna go ahead and do my pen and ink work in the chair before trying to complete the table elements there. Just adding in lines and marks that I feel will help me describe those textures and those little details that I see, being very loose about everything. This is the fun part of the process. So everything has been essentially traced over, and I've even started adding in some minor details just with my pen right away. I'm gonna do a few more texture effects, and I'm gonna call this done. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with how my sketch is looking. There's definitely little imperfections, things that I went over that I wasn't intending to, but I think I've succeeded at this little inside of a room sketch. gonna go ahead and erase my pencil work. All right, so here is my informal perspective practice, my little study that I did of a corner, the inside of a room here. So the objective with this one was, again, to make use of our knowledge of perspective and 3D form to create a believable sensation of depth and perspective in the scene. And I am all done. All right, you guys, that is gonna do it for today's video. I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you found it helpful. And if you did, pretty please make sure to give this video a thumbs up because it really helps support the work that I am doing here on YouTube and helps others get to know about my channel. Thank you so much for watching today. Don't forget to subscribe and click on that little bell so that you can be notified of when I share my new videos, which happens every single week. Have a beautiful rest of the day and see you soon. Bye guys.